Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Matty.
And I'm your co-host Jacob, and today's episode is Cities of the Future. So this is kind of a very broad subject, I think. There's lots of different ways that you can approach this and tackle it, but we're going to try and rein in on a few because it is quite a spectacular choice of things. But we're going to try and rein in on a few and try and discuss really what it's going to be like in 100 years. So a real thought experiment.
Yeah, so when we were sort of discussing this earlier, I think we sort of said that the two things that we were going to try and stay away from now were sort of climate and energy sorts of things, and also AI, because they're just sort of such big topics that they sort of deserve their own episode. And in this episode, we're going to try and focus sort of on cities and sort of how we're going to be living and transport, both on Earth and in space, I guess. So at least that's what I'm hoping we're going to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to approach it. And a good way to start this off, I think, is talking about population, just because it's obviously exponentially going up. And I was reading this thing from the National Geographic today, and by 2050, the population is going to reach 9.8 billion, and they expect at least 70% of that population to live in urban areas like cities. So it's like you said, it does need some thought put into it, really, because we're all going to be crammed into one place in the future.
Yeah, so yeah, that 75%, just to put in context, I think now the world average is about 55%. But sort of when I was looking at this population sort of problem, I guess, it was in particular this shift in sort of sub-Saharan Africa and sort of Middle East and Asia was going to sort of drive this, because sort of, I guess, the mega city now that people know about most is Tokyo.
Yeah.
So Japan is 91%, 92% urban population. The US and UK are sort of mid 80s, so we're sort of already well above that. But obviously, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that number's quite a bit lower. And in the future, sort of in the next 100 years, so I got some sort of stats for 2100. The biggest cities in the world are going to be Lagos, Nigeria, Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, quite a few places in India, these sorts of places. And they're going to be having populations of upwards of 50, 60 million. So that's going to be sort of where the drive is. I think Lagos, Nigeria, they predicted by 2100 is going to have a population of 90 million.
Oh my God.
Which is about... That's about 3 times the size of Tokyo now.
Well, this was going to be something that I was going to say, kind of like kick it off as well, was just the idea that when you're thinking about cities in the future as well, it's not just like ones that we've got right now that are like established, because also like from climate change and stuff, we're going to see like mass immigration to like other areas. Assuming if we didn't sort it out, we might sort it out. But if we didn't sort it out, there's going to be like mass migrations of people moving either closer to the equator or away from the equator, and that could, as you're saying, like can also like seed new areas, if that makes sense. Places that people might not be thinking are going to have that boom or have that infrastructure will, and other places like London might be underwater.
Yep, exactly. But yeah, I think it's just sort of worth bearing in mind before we get into like the techie side of stuff, that there's this sort of social element to things, and there's going to be quite a lot of upheaval, I think, as people sort of move around, and these new... I think like it's been said that like the 19th century was like Britain's century. The last 100 years have been America's century. This sort of 50 years is going to be China. Then sort of India's going to come to the forefront, and then the 2100s is going to be sort of Africa's time. So, and like
can
these
see
numbers
that.
would support that, this idea that, you know, I think it was 6 or 7 of the world's biggest cities are going to be in Africa with populations of 50 million plus. So
It's just
they're going to be,
insane, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine a city of that size, to be honest. You know,
Yeah.
I think London is about 10 or 12 million, I think.
Yeah.
And like, obviously that's big.
Yeah.
We were talking nine times that population. Is just insane.
That's actually crazy. And like that amount of people as well.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just think of like what you need to have that city running. Do you know what I mean? In like terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of transport. Like that's so
Yeah.
much just to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of like something I wanted to touch on quickly as well before we got started, was just the idea of the Kardashev scale, because I've been talking about this for a couple of episodes. I keep mentioning it, so I thought here's a good place to kind of drop it in. But essentially, the Kardashev scale is kind of like a way of scaling like a civilization. So like when you get to 1, the idea is that you can like fully, I wouldn't say what how would you describe it? It's like when you get to 1, you can fully use everything on your planet and you're like renewable.
Yeah, like utilize or
Yeah, utilize, that's a good word. Utilize everything on your planet. And then when you get to type 2, that's everything on your planet, neighboring planets. And then I think 3 is neighboring planets and the sun. So you can like utilize everything in your solar system. And then there's ideas for 4 and 5, depending on how far along you go down. And if you think that there are people that utilize their whole galaxy and their whole universe. But just to put it in perspective of where we're at about 0.7. So we're still quite primitive along the line just for ourselves, because it's like we haven't even figured out just how to get on A-OK here just yet. But
yeah.
definitely by 2120 you could see us being at a number 1 for sure, especially with like renewable energy and keeping everything going. Because didn't British government also recently announced that we want to go fully to wind energy by 2050?
Yeah, well, I think that, I did see something recently for the British government, but I think there's like a wider, is it the Paris Accord, which is we're meant to hit like net zero by 2050. And obviously quite a few countries have signed up to that, but they seem to be sort of aiming for this 2050 net zero across the board kind of thing. That's looking unlikely, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, because in order for us to have like these mega cities that you're like talking about, it's like I was saying, we kind of need to be able to run them and power them.
Yeah.
For it to be like viable. So it's just such a huge task, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think a good thing of this is that people are going to be living in cities, as like urbanization. Ultimately, if you do it properly and you don't do like what Los Angeles is and build outwards in sprawling grey strips, if you do it properly, you can build quite sustainable, dense urban clusters, and ultimately that's going to have to be the answer, because you could see how you could build neighborhoods, you know, and I think sort of places like Korea and Japan are doing this quite well already. Is you build sort of mixed use developments so that people can live, work, and like enjoy leisure within walking or within sort of small commuter distances. That's ultimately got to be the aim, and then you sort of stay there, and then if you need to go to do sort of bigger things or sort of spontaneous more specialized things, then you obviously then have to travel on the tube or travel sort of longer distances kind of thing. But the one sort of saving grace of these megacities is that they will become quite dense and quite localized. So you can sort of get rid of a lot of the problems that we have with sort of current cities which sprawl and sort of suburbia and rural developments in just building things closer together. So
yeah. Well, this was something I was going to talk to you about, actually, because this whole idea, I don't know if you're into it or not, but I've been interested in it, and I can imagine you might have read up a little bit about it, because you're quite interested in the idea of like how everything like flows and stuff within the ecostructure.
So my nerdy sort of pastime is like city planning and logistics and built environment. So I love that sort of stuff. So
cool. So I've got a question for you. So this whole like idea of like these Google campuses and these Facebook campuses, do you think that's kind of where it's going? So like super localized kind of thing, like where you're at, you never kind of really have to leave because you can buy everything from that area. You work in that area, and maybe because of COVID too, like as we're seeing with like working from home, and I can definitely see in the future just from autonomy, which we won't touch on too much, but there won't be a 5-day working week unless you've probably got a specialized job. So like open like workspaces that nobody actually owns, but you kind of just come and go and it's all shared. And I can see like a 3-day working week probably. So like something like that, which is what they're kind of doing at some of these campuses and stuff. Do you think it's just going to be like that, but just hundreds of them around the city?
The autonomy stuff and sort of changing and working patterns was something that I wanted to do in a later episode and maybe even next week. But
okay, cool.
These campuses, I think they address certain problems. So the idea of creating walkable spaces that incorporates natural materials and green spaces. So, you know, you've seen the Google and Apple campuses that have these like gorgeous gardens and solar panel roofs and stuff. This sort of renewable, sustainable built environment is definitely what's going to have to happen. Like everything in these buildings, I can't remember what the certification is now, but you get like this gold or platinum certified, and you have to meet these like really stringent criteria of using renewable materials and sort of water utilization and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But there is a sort of wider issue of these, particularly with tech companies, if this sort of like gentrification of cities and making this sort of social bubble. So like Apple campus is the one. The actual campus itself is like gorgeous and that's like the ideal working space. But everyone sort of has to drive there, and it's sort of out on the edge of town in like urban sprawl. And it's not the problem, I think, isn't going to be building individual developments. It's going to be integrating it all into a city that actually functions together, because there's ultimately going to be some services that you can't do on like a very localized thing. So, you know, you could build a Google campus that has, you know, some housing and people work there and some general shops and a gym and that sort of stuff. But it was not going to be big enough to sustain a hospital or to sustain an airport or a sort of specialized luxury goods shop, for example.
Yeah.
So there has to be this sort of like integration between developments that just isn't happening at the moment. And there is a sort of trap of, I think, you can build these sort of almost sub-communities that are like, oh, we're like really eco-conscious and we're like really sort of like up on this stuff, but they're sort of like segregated from the rest of society.
Yeah.
And they become a bit like a gated community. I think that's sort of one thing to be wary of with this sort of stuff.
Yeah. I was watching an interview today when they were talking to one of the owners of Slack, and he was talking about this because they have a whole like kind of like idea of how they're running stuff. I don't know if you've looked into like what Slack do, but their whole idea is that they want this open like working space, kind of like a campus, but they don't want the campus because this is just kind of your work, and they want you to go back to your community and stuff. And they were talking about how over the last couple of years they've been like trying to figure out a way to do this, and it's been like a really big struggle for them, because either you like have everybody in one place, or like you were saying, you have them travel in, but then they have to like leave their community to come to like this community that they're trying to build. So it's like you said, it's going to be tough getting everybody to be like integrated, but I feel like that's like a design problem, right? Like that's something.
Yeah, it's striking the difference between sort of building these very closed off things and building things that don't really serve any purpose. Like, you know, you can build a Google campus, and on one like very extreme, you could have it as literally people live there in a bubble and never leave. And on the other side of the things, you have it very, very open, and it's sort of, there's no need for people to go to it because it doesn't really do anything. So it's sort of striking this balance, and I think, yeah, it's got to be sort of a wider debate that we have about how we actually build cities and integrate stuff together, I think. But,
yeah, no, for sure. I'd agree with you on that. Now, I did a little bit of digging, and I found this really cool report, and it was from, I think they're an organization called Smart Things Future, and basically it was a report highlighting things that they thought would be a thing in 100 years. And it was made in 2016, so 2116 is when they're kind of looking at. And I thought there was some really like interesting things, so I wanted to read through a few of these and see what you were thinking on them. But basically, what they're saying is many of these predictions were influenced by environmental conditions, growing populations, structures that have like space more in mind instead of practicality, and then also the idea of like diminishing resources and how we can like upscale or have more renewable products. And basically some of the things that they mention here, which sound pretty cool. If you're a sci-fi nut, you're probably imagining now like some futuristic world like iRobot or something, but it sounds cool. But what we've got is we've got super skyscrapers, and their idea with them is like carbon nanotubes and diamond nanotubes that basically create towering megastructures that dwarf today's skyscrapers. We've got earth scrapers, which just instead of building up, they're building down, and they're basically like 25-story scrapers, but going below ground. They talk about the idea of underwater cities becoming a reality, where you actually use the water itself to create a breathable atmosphere, and then use the generators to have hydrogen fuel in the process. And then another thing that they talk about are personal drones, with ones for different kind of ideas. So there might be drones that's like a taxi service, or there might be drones that deliver your shopping to you, or there might even be drones, which sounds a little bit dystopian and police state, but there might be like police drones as well that fly around and keep an eye on everything. But when I was reading some of that, even though some of it sounds like a little bit far-fetched and we haven't really seen it yet, like you can see some of these things happening, because like, aren't the Boring Company like building tunnels under Las Vegas and California to kind of help with the traffic and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so if we just sort of go through a couple of those things one by one, the underground thing and the water thing, I think, is probably not being out of all those things, is probably being explored least at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, like the material science for super skyscrapers and drones, obviously, like big news. But the underground and underwater stuff, I think, probably hasn't got that much traction at the moment.
Yeah.
But they have the potential to really change things. So with the water stuff, the biggest advantage of that is that underwater, the climate and the weather is much more sort of constant.
Yeah.
Like, and particularly in areas like the equator, where the climate over the next 100 years is going to become pretty much uninhabitable. and you're going to see millions of people displaced by that.
Yeah.
Building underwater, yeah, there might be 1 or 2 degrees sort of temperature rise, but for a built structure, that's not a massive deal. And, over the year, you're talking maybe a couple of degrees sort of variation between winter and summer.
Yeah.
So the underwater stuff is really interesting. And I can see that taking off big time. And then the underground stuff, again, that's a sort of a benefit for that. And it's just sort of dead space that we are almost certainly going to have to use for certain things. So whether it's transport, another one would be sort of underground farms. So sort of using hydroponics and stuff.
Yeah.
Because you said about earlier, one of the big things of like these mega cities is feeding a population that big. If you can build underground farms that supply sort of the basics, so you're growing sort of wheats and sort of salads and stuff, then, and it's all local, then that obviously has a massive impact as well. So those would be the 2 things that I would say are most interesting, sort of underwater built structures and underground for particularly farming purposes. I think it's going to be huge.
Yeah, I can imagine as well, like the whole idea of underwater and underground, like going forward as well, would be kind of like safer maybe in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Like say if climate change doesn't really go our way and
Mm-hmm.
a load of bad things happen, like you were saying, I hadn't thought about that, with the idea that like not a lot really changes underwater, and especially like underground too, because haven't they done like studies as well, and they found that like underground tunnels and stuff are affected less by earthquakes as well, like it's safer.
I think obviously if it gets hit directly by an earthquake, it's not be great, but I think that's the sort of general, a lot of earthquake damage comes from sort of soft ground, like ground level stuff, like basically stuff built on sand that just shakes around. So
because it's like a prong, isn't it, that you like vibrate? It's like on the further end it's moving more, and then underground it's like moving less, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But no, I hadn't thought about that. That's a cool point. Definitely with like the idea of the underwater ones, I could see that becoming a much more thing. And it kind of just, I feel like going back to last week a little bit as well on the whole great filter idea, we're kind of ensuring humanity's survival a little bit more once we can do everything underground as well.
Yeah.
It's like all those old sci-fi films you see where they all live in like the craters of the moon and stuff.
Yeah. But I think that first point that you mentioned there about the like super scrapers and that sort of development, I would put money on that not happening.
Okay.
What do you think? Do you sort of, because I think probably most people do envision a future where like we have like 2-kilometer tall towers and like we're all living in these like super scrapers and
yeah, no. Here's my viewpoint on it, because like I agree with you. Like growing up, I used to read like a lot of like Marvel comics and stuff. So you always used to get like these dystopian like future images where they'd basically build a city over the old city, and like there were poor people living in what we know as New York, but then there's a new New York floating above it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I'd agree with you. I don't think we're going to go up. I think we're going to go down, especially if the climate goes down the pan. It wouldn't make sense to go up, just because there's like too many like weather disasters that can happen, especially like with hurricanes and all this kind of stuff that we have.
Yeah,
I wouldn't like to be the engineer trying to figure out how we have a 2-mile skyscraper or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think there's sort of obviously inherent risks that come with building really tall. I think we're probably build up in the short term to a medium level. Like you see with like London, they've over the last 20 years started to build like medium tall skyscrapers, haven't they? I think in the industry, 150 meters is a skyscraper and 300 is a like super skyscraper, is what they call it now. So I think we'll probably see a lot more like 150, 200 meter developments. But again, back to the social stuff, that as countries develop, and we're seeing it now with China, is they get to like middle income territory where they're sort of quite wealthy and people are doing well, and people sort of start to not want to live in these really dense, tightly packed cities. So like China, actually, I think a couple of weeks ago, like China like built huge towers, and like if you look at the list of, like world's tallest skyscrapers, most of them are in China, and they're building more than are built. I think there's basically pretty much more being built in China now than there are in the rest of the world combined. Like,
Wow.
but they recently passed laws that basically said they can't build anything over 150 meters anymore.
Okay.
You're like they'll have to get like really tight zoning permissions to build like these big skyscrapers, and it's basically over because they've reached this sort of point of where people don't want to live in these like really tall shadowed cities anymore because they've got the money to do it. So I think, yeah, out of all of those ones, I think probably the super scrapers is the least likely to happen, just because there's this sort of cost trade-off of you can get some good benefits from building taller, but the cost to do it and the sort of negative aspects of it just sort of become bigger the more you build.
Yeah. I think maybe as well another way of looking at it, which I hadn't thought of, is the idea of going underground and underwater as well probably would be more likely just because of what we've got planned with space and like settlements on the moon and stuff, like with those kind of technologies where we're like looking into like building into the crater or like in vacuums of space and stuff. Like I feel like once we have the technology to like build and have something that's like on Mars, for instance, or like on the moon that can withstand those kind of things, that probably will like transfer over into architecture, like designs on planet Earth, where we're able to then also do that. Do you know what I mean? Like we're not ever going to go to Mars and build a 2-kilometer high skyscraper and then be like, oh cool, let's build that here too. Do you know what I mean? So I think like what you're saying probably does make more sense. We're more likely to go the other way because we're also trying to figure out how to do that on other planets.
Yeah. If I was going to sort of bet on it, I would say that ground level we would see this sort of medium rise development for people to live and sort of socialize in.
Yeah.
And then you'll see a lot of sort of the infrastructure stuff go underground, and maybe workplaces and stuff that just don't need to be above ground. You know, so obviously, you know, you build these mega cities, things like transport, sewage, water, energy, data links, all that sort of stuff. You know, ground is just the sort of obvious place to put it all. So,
yeah, totally. A little bit off topic, but I was listening to something today, and it was really interesting, right? And I wanted to see what you thought about it, but they were basically talking about like nuclear waste and stuff, and they were saying that when you look at like the human language and how much it's changed since we've been like around from the beginning, kind of thing. They were saying like some of these radioactive materials have got like 200,000 years until they should be like dug up, and they were saying like, what symbol? This was a competition that they were doing to the public. They were like, what symbol could you create that would like always mean radioactive material, even if we get wiped out as a civilization, if something new came along in the future or this knowledge was lost?
Yeah.
What's like the perfect way to describe this is nuclear waste? And it was like a really interesting thought, because I was like, oh my God, yeah, well, it would like, I straight went to, it would be a diagram or a picture. But then I was like, no, because like the radioactive thing wouldn't be that. They might not have the same symbol as what we've come up with right now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I've seen this. I'm sure I watched a video on it. And it's like even the basics of like what we assume, like yellow and black is dangerous, obviously.
Yeah.
That might be the case in like a future civilization.
Yeah.
And is this the one where they sort of ended up, it was like sort of like sculptures were like one of the best things. They built like these really like jaggedy pyramids over it and stuff.
Yeah. That was it. It was interesting because it just made me think. It was like, God, can you imagine that? Can you imagine if like someone back in human history had found like some radioactive material or something, and they'd like put it in the ground, and we'd found this now, and we were like, because it wasn't our symbol, we just opened it and then everybody died.
Yeah.
That was like near it. But it's good food for thought thinking about these kind of things, because even like language changes, do you know what I mean? Because even if you look at like Neuralink and this whole idea that you can interface with technology, because it's all about like the rate that you can send and receive data, isn't it? Because your thumbs just aren't that fast.
Yeah.
If you could like think a text and then send that text to someone, obviously it's going to be a lot quicker. But even like the idea of Neuralink in a city in like 100 years time, like just the fluidity of how everything goes as well. Because like we're already living in a society where everything's like pretty much contactless. It's very rare that a shop or someone will only accept cash. And you can almost see like either a utopia or a dystopia, depending on how you look at it. But like this idea that it's all just fluid. You have one thing that accesses everything, kind of thing. Because one thing this report was saying, which I thought was really interesting, was this idea of like medipods. And they're basically saying that like flats would have like a medipod in them, and then through like AI, you'd be basically be able to step in this medipod and it would confirm whether or not you were ill and provide a digital diagnosis to you and to your employer. So there's like no messing around. Like if you feel ill, you just go and step in, step out, and you don't then have to leave your house and infect everyone and cause anything in the future. Do you know what I mean? It's all like super localized. And I was thinking about that, and it just blew my mind.
It gets very... Have you watched Black Mirror at all?
Yeah.
The episode where there's like the social scores and stuff, and like people get voted on.
Yeah.
It gets very much like that, and like again with China, like that's sort of already being implemented in a dystopian way, and it's pretty crazy what goes on over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
no, totally. I think Community. Have you ever watched Community? It's like a comedian, like a comedy TV show.
Not watched. No.
It's pretty good. It's got like Donald Glover and like everybody in it. But there's an episode in that where like someone develops an app on campus, but the campus goes into lockdown, so all they've got is this app, and it's all based off like what people rate each other. But like, because it's quite funny, it goes like doomsday, and then like the campus gets segregated into sections, and you're not allowed in this section if you're only 3 thumbs up, kind of thing. And everybody like starts like treating each other different ways, and all the 5s get access to the food of the school meals first and stuff. And it's just quite funny. But you could totally like you were saying with like the Black Mirror episode, like that, is it the woman's like, she's having a bad day and it keeps going from like worse to worse.
Yeah, I think there's like a bit where she just sort of has like a bit of a bad day and she's in a bit of a mood, so she doesn't like sort of interact with someone, so they sort of like downvote her in the lift, and like her score drops more. And then it gets to the point where the thing that's really stuck out with me was there's a bit where she can't get a plane ticket or she can't get a train ticket or something to go to the wedding because she hasn't got a high enough score. And I was reading, they actually do that in China. Like you're not allowed to take international flights or like long train journeys if your score isn't high enough.
Can you imagine?
That is like actually happening now. But
oh my God. I saw something as well actually that like if you break like certain laws, they don't even like contact you to let you know you've broken a law. You just get charged.
Yeah.
I was like seeing this thing that like somebody like ran a red light, and instead of like it being like out here in the UK, I don't know what happens in America, but like in the UK, like if you got pulled over or a speeding ticket, they basically notify and ask you to pay. But like in China, they just take the money out your account even if you don't have it, and you're just in debt.
Yeah.
And it was just like blew my mind, because like imagine if you're like in a situation that you don't want to be in and you also can't leave because of the situation you're in. And I feel like, without getting like super dystopian on everybody, like that could definitely be a potential future with like algorithms and stuff, and following people
It's
a lot
sort
more.
it's sort of starting to creep in ways that, like, think about Uber. Like, you get a rating on Uber, and people can like refuse to give you a lift because they don't like your rating.
Yeah.
Like, it's already starting to happen, and like, I'm almost certain it will like become more of a factor in the way this is sort of handled on things. And I could very easily see it, where you get a rating on your like, like you rate like waiters and waitresses in like restaurants you go to, and like people can see like whether they're good or not and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And like once you get to that sort of point, it becomes very odd, I think.
Yeah.
I think the sort of inevitable is that you end up with like a class of people who are subservient, trying to like get their ratings up, and then a class of people who are sort of above everyone, and people sort of rate highly just to sort of be on their like good side, and you get this sort of like class system based on social points.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, it's weird. It's weird. It's weird to talk about because when you start like talking about this kind of stuff, like technology can get quite cynical quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Even like for instance GPS. Do you know what I mean? Like I can imagine like now we already have the capability to like manage where people are and stuff. And looking into the future, you're probably going to have AI managing traffic, and based off everybody's phones, it's going to be able to decide, oh, it's quite congested there, let's move these people here, let's move these people there. But even like now with like our lockdown, can you imagine if like you go to leave your house but your front door won't open in this digital age in 100 years, and it's like you can't leave because of curfew or lockdown, and you're just not allowed to go, and then you just get sent your 3D printed meals. Because this was something I was going to touch on in a minute, but you go first.
There is this, when you become sort of reliant on technology, and it's sort of almost becoming like society becoming data driven, is that, I'm a sort of sciencey guy, and you sort of think of data driven, like a meritocracy almost, where things like are driven by the data. Yeah. But it does sometimes give these like weird, unforeseen consequences. Like, it's entirely possible that you, for example, you set up an AI that says, okay, control the traffic on this intersection sort of thing. And you think, oh, okay, it'll just sort of do kind of what it's doing now, but a bit more efficiently. Well, the AI could very easily learn, oh, this road of people, they are sort of more important, or they need to be somewhere more. So it just sort of like stops the other road from working during like peak hours, for example. And like this sort of stuff, it quickly descends into what is the best thing to do versus what is the like moral good thing to do. Yeah. And sort of answering that question is odd, and not intuitive sometimes, I think. Yeah. Because ultimately, we've already seen it, is that things become more connected and everything does become driven by the data. I was thinking the other day about like myself, like 15 years ago, I think my family had like the family computer. And then like 10 years ago, I got like an iPad or an iPod Touch, and then I had, smartphones. And I look around now and I'm thinking like I've got like laptop, iPad, phone, my 2 phones, my lights are connected to the Wi-Fi, like, and it just sort of goes a bit mental. And when you then start to add like your car is connected and like all your banking details and all this sort of stuff, you can have like very weird consequences just from the data doing its thing.
Yeah, it blew my mind because my little cousin a couple of years ago was asking if the phone was broke because he couldn't see who he was talking to because of like FaceTime. Yeah, I was like, no, yeah, that makes sense. And like, you jump back to like my nan's generation, and it's like one house phone. And I even remember like when I was a kid, like you had to phone at certain times because after 6 p.m. it was free calls, and exactly, text messages were like 25 cent or 25p depending where you live. And if you sent a photo, that was like £1.50. And
But
then,
if you sent a photo, like that was your entire monthly allowance.
yeah.
Like that.
And if you refreshed a web page, that was like some of it gone.
Yeah.
And then you don't get it like nowadays. I don't know about you, but when I'm messaging people, I'm really bad about it. Instead of just sending one message that has everything in it that they needed, I'll send like 3 or 4 over the span of like 3 minutes because I'll remember something, add it in. Couldn't do that back then. Don't have enough credit. You got to manage those texts.
The thing that like this like blew my mind was I was thinking back, like my family first got Wi-Fi, so not dial-up connection, when I started high school, so it would have been about 12, 13 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I remember we had like BT internet, which at the time was like pretty decent. It was one of the better ones. And we had like a Wi-Fi allowance of 10 gigabytes a month. Like that was like on the router, that was it, 10 gigabytes. And then this year, my phone contract's got like unlimited data. And when I was at university in lockdown, like the Wi-Fi in my room was terrible. So I just used to put everything through my phone as a hotspot. And so I'd be doing like work during the day, like uploading stuff to like the drive that I was working for a partner. And then in the evening, I'd sort of watch some sort of YouTube and Netflix and stuff. And I'd be like using social media. I'm not like a heavy like internet user. And like at the end of the month, I looked, I'd use like 150 gigabytes. Like just the amount of data that people generate now is just huge, isn't it? And
no, it actually is. It actually is. It blew my mind a couple of like months ago because I went home and I was like helping my mum just like clear out the attic and stuff, and found a box of floppy disks. And these floppy disks, they had 25 megabytes of storage on them.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that would be like what, 4 or 5 songs, if that.
Yeah.
And like, it's such a waste of plastic.
The one for me is, remember the old PlayStation 2 memory cards?
Yeah. The ones you'd like shove
8
in.
megabytes.
Yeah.
8 megabytes.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. But before we completely go off on one, I'm just read a couple of things off this. So they kind of finish this basically by talking about, this is basically all those like skyscrapers and earth scrapers and underwater cities and all this kind of stuff. That's what they're kind of predicting based off current trends. But then they also start talking about things as like technology develops.
Yeah.
And there's some pretty cool ones. So they talk about like 3D printing houses and furniture, which will probably definitely be a thing. I mean, they've got that startup as well that NASA have just signed something with, that they want to 3D print habitats for like Mars and stuff, don't they? So you can totally see that happening.
On Earth, like major, like even skyscrapers now are being built with like prefab parts. So like they literally contain like 4 or 5 bits that just slot together and they build like skyscrapers. And yeah, I think I can't remember if it was Mars or the Moon, but they basically want to send a printer and it will take like moon dust or Mars dust and make it into like a 3D printable material that they can just print a Mars base with. So
yeah, that's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, this sort of new construction techniques.
But then there's something I've never heard of: hyper flexible living space.
Is this where, I could be completely wrong, and anyone listening fact check this, but I think it's where you have like, have you seen the like very small rooms where like you pull the bed out the wall and the table comes up from the floor and this sort of stuff?
Yes.
So like,
I think so.
Is that it?
I think so. So it says it's basically got like smart walls, so you can adapt them. You can adapt the layout of the room to suit your needs. So like you're saying, you can pull like the bed out of the wall, or like shelving out of the wall on demand, or like tables up from the ground, or seats up from the ground. And then they start playing with the idea of like LED surfaced rooms. So from your app, you can decide what wallpaper color you've got, or like what color your kitchen is, or you can display like underwater or outside, wherever you want.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I was just reading about it, and they were like saying how like you could also have like malleable space. So like you might get an apartment which is like, I don't know, 10 meters by 10 meters. That's quite a big apartment, but 10 meters by 10 meters, but all the walls inside it are malleable and you can move it all around. So if you need a bigger kitchen for an event, you can make all your other rooms smaller.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I've seen a few. I think at the moment they're sort of like small scale, like prototype stuff. But yeah, I think probably people are going to have to get used to living with less space. And particularly like the idea of like having like a 3-bedroom house is probably going to vanish as space gets used up.
And it's not just space, it's food as well. This is the next thing that they're talking about is 3D printed food. And I can see that definitely becoming a thing. I mean, we have to figure out a way that we could do this, especially if we want to start traversing the solar system and interstellar space and all that kind of stuff. Because, like, you can't really... Can you do it with crops? Or do they, like, require cycles and stuff too much? Like, it seems like a no-brainer to go 3D printing and just have the resources like flat packed ready and just print the food as you go.
I think it depends. I think certainly for like a Mars mission where we just go and visit, it will probably be like space food, like flat pack stuff. But presumably for like longer missions, if we want to actually have it somewhere, we're going to have to think of something to grow. Unless we want to. I don't think it's practical that we set up like a colony on Mars and we send like refueling things like we do to like International Space Station every like week or two. That doesn't seem that practical.
Because aren't they doing like lab grown meat and stuff like that now?
Yeah, so the lab grown meat one is I think really interesting because obviously with the like climate change side of stuff, that is definitely that's almost certainly going to happen in the next sort of 10 years, I imagine. So but yeah, definitely for sort of like near term space stuff, I'm pretty certain they're going to need a way to make decent food because these people are going to be there for like a month, like months or years, sort of thing, in a way that is also cost effective and easy.
Interesting. And then the last thing that they touch on is this idea of hologram meetings for work, but I don't know.
I
don't know about that. We're going to get like some Star Wars council where you tap a button, walk into a room, and you're just there in hologram form.
Yeah. I think we're probably nearly done on this, but this is sort of like one of my finer things is that when you're trying to predict the future, you very often fall into a trap of, okay, what technologies do we have now? Okay, we're going to be using those, but like better versions of them. And like, if you look back in the past, people were like, oh, okay, we've got like these new cars and stuff. In the future, we're going to be using like really amazing cars. And like, actually what people end up using is probably not even available yet.
Yeah.
Like, if people want to meet, the probable solution, maybe one solution is like the Neuralink stuff where you just communicate through thought, not sort of going to this is very sort of antiquated, isn't it? Going to like a designated video conference room and sitting down and a hologram pops up and like this is like 2100 imagined in the year 2000.
Totally. But I'd agree with you. I think before we finish this up, the last real thing to talk about with cities in like 100 years time is the whole idea of some of these cities or settlements might not actually be on planet Earth. I feel, especially, I don't know if anybody's like seen online, but I know that it's some of Matty's news, so I'm not gonna. Well, it might have been news last week, but I think it's this week. But there's the idea of a moon base that they're talking about right now with Artemis and all that kind of stuff, and then you've got like the first kind of few renders of the settlement on Mars, and it's interesting because those kind of settlements, or do you call them like cities? Yeah, I wouldn't really say they were cities, but the idea of them is they have to be like 100% renewable, don't they? So that when they're set up, they can kind of just go from there. And I feel like once we figure, it's like one of those things, isn't it? I hate the argument because I see it online all the time with people when they're like, oh, we shouldn't be aiming to leave the planet, we should be fixing it. And like, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, somebody's trying to figure out how we can live on Mars, like renewably and like efficiently. And if they figure that out, you might be able to also apply that to Earth.
Yeah.
But
ultimately, solution will probably be, we build like prototypes here of like renewable like biomes and stuff, and then we send some people to Mars and they sort of test them, and then we improve on them and we go back and forth.
Yeah.
And like, this does annoy me as well. There's so many technologies that come out of the space programs that you just don't foresee, and like there's so much we just take for granted now that just wouldn't exist if we never bothered to do it. So
yeah, no, totally. And as well, like it's like you were saying earlier, like even with Africa, for instance, they're gonna like skip like an industrial revolution just because of like the technology that will be available to them when they're like mass building. Do you know what I mean? They probably won't have all the telephone lines and stuff that the UK has, because they'll probably go for more of a Wi-Fi model, or even like something like Starlink. And it's like these settlements on like the moon and Mars, we probably can't really even fully fathom them, because they're going to skip a lot of what we've gone through, or how we've built cities here on Earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's almost like a perfect model. There will be like relatively large cities in sub-Saharan Africa that at the moment are sort of like small villages or small towns that will develop very, very rapidly, while being almost completely cut off from other places just because they don't have the like telephone connections and the road infrastructure and stuff.
Yeah.
But they will develop very quickly, and it's almost going to be a model of, okay, if we start with like very small amount of resources in a sort of remote location, how does it develop in a sustainable way? And again, we'll probably see that in the next couple of years anyway. And then that sort of thought process will then be applied to Mars, I'd guess. So, yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting for sure. Should we move on to the news segment for the week?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
So can I just start with a bit of tech news, because it's very closely related to this. So my tech news was Microsoft have announced that they're going to be allowing or pushing for work from home indefinitely as the norm from now on. So I think they said that sort of a couple of other companies like Google and Facebook have already done this. But with obviously the coronavirus, working from home has become a thing, and it looks like it's here to stay. And we said about like office spaces being more adaptable, and that is ultimately going to be where it's going to go. People will work from home at least some of the time, and offices and the workplace will become more of a like collaborative place where people actually do stuff together rather than just sitting in a cubicle all day. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that to start with, because it was related to what we were discussing earlier.
Cool. So my first little bit of news is not really news, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So SpaceX announced that the Starman, so I don't know if anybody ever followed this, but basically a couple of years back, Elon Musk put old Tesla Roadster into space with a SpaceX astronaut suit sitting in it called Starman. But so they announced, I think it was on the 7th, which was a couple of days ago, but basically it was on the close approach to Mars, and it was within 0.05 astronomical units, which is around under 5 million miles. But it was actually closer to Mars than it was to Earth, just because of like the opposition. I thought that was pretty cool, because how they're trying to go to Mars and everything first.
Yeah, if I imagine most of our listeners have probably aware of this, but if you've not seen it, just the picture of it just looks ridiculous, doesn't it? It's this bright red Tesla with an astronaut sat in it, just like perched on top of a rocket. And it's just pretty cool that he's decided to do this, and I think it's quite an ingenious way to show what they're doing and what they can do. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's funny. It's funny for sure. I wonder if like one day there'll be like a mission to like go and retrieve it in the future. Because I always think about things like that. I feel like one day when we get to like a space capability, are we not going to want to go and see where Voyager is? Are future humans going to want to find Voyager and see what we thought about it when we sent it out?
I would love to get to the point where like we've made a moon base and we have like the resources that they can go and like pick up like the old landers and stuff and like make a museum of all the stuff on the moon. And there'd just be like, obviously there'd be like the Eagle and the rovers and the buggies and stuff. And then just stuff like tools that have been left behind and golf balls and stuff.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be pretty great.
It would be pretty cool if we just went and started retrieving all the stuff that we'd sent out. But no, what else have you got for your news then?
So I had one bit of space news, which was on UFOs. So this was on space.com today. So on what's the date today? 11th? 12th as we're recording it.
12th.
And basically, this group of scientists are calling for a genuine scientific approach to looking at what the Navy calls unidentified aerial phenomena. So, like, this is the stuff, this is in America, and I'm sure you've all seen the videos of you have this, like, black streak, like, flying across the sky and stuff.
Yeah.
And if you look at the article, there's some really interesting, like, videos, and, like, these stuff obviously looks really cool, of like actual like Navy like fighter pilots like looking at this stuff, and I don't want to say they are aliens, but like this stuff looks like UFOs. Like if you're gonna draw it, this like flashing, gyrating blob that like zooms off super quick. There's like some pretty cool videos out there, and like this group of scientists are basically saying we should be investigating this and doing something with it, and not just sort of relying on like fighter pilots to capture it on like shaky 360p video, but actually putting some resources into studying this stuff, because you know, again, I'm not saying it's aliens, but this could be some cool weather phenomena or some cool potentially biological thing, like bird migration or something that we just don't know about. And they sort of want to get like AI involved in actually like tracking this sort of stuff and trying to pick up what it's doing to understand it a bit more, I think. That's
cool. Something that I actually saw on the whole like UFO front, because UFO Twitter is always good. The To the Stars Academy are doing something actually pretty cool. They're releasing an app in the coming months, and they haven't really spoke a lot about it, but I think To the Stars now have got a podcast, and they've been having like different defense people coming on talking about what they're doing with the UAP thing, because they've announced a new task force, haven't they, as well, the US government, to like try and look into it.
Yeah.
But it seems like a really cool idea, and essentially what they're doing is they're building an app that's going to have like a machine learning algorithm in it that can kind of take in the data and tell you what it is off the bat. And basically the way that it's going to work is if you see something in the sky, like an unidentified flying object, you take your phone out, turn this app on, and kind of like point your camera at it. And then it will scan its database, tell you if anybody else has seen this object on planet Earth, and kind of like mark it as an event. But as well, it will also notify everybody in the area that has the app, so they can also go outside with a direction to look in, so it can collect more data on the object. And I thought that was pretty cool, because like for all the people that are like hardcore like conspiracy theorists and they think they're seeing something, like even if it's something as silly as like Starlink, they can put this app on it and be told that it's Starlink, and that kind of like stops that one from getting any more insane. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then, like, on the other breath as well, like, could be interesting, because what happens if we get like loads of people start being like, oh yeah, it's just Starlink or something, and then they go to check and then it's not. So that could also be interesting. But I thought it was a cool way of tackling it, because you're kind of giving more power to the public. You're like, listen, we're going to have this app, and everybody that's got it, it'll tell you to go outside and have a look for yourself, and you can kind of make your mind up.
Yeah, I think this idea of being able to collect more data and also like trying to diffuse some of these people who are a bit skeptical about it by making it more accessible and more transparent, I guess. Because I think in particular in America, a lot of this stuff was sort of like classified and kept secret for decades, when it probably didn't need to be. There is probably a logical explanation for this that someone could very easily give, but because it's been like shrouded in secrecy for so long, it sort of has this reputation of being a bit wacky and conspiracy like. Yeah,
I'd agree with you. So I'm going to keep it on the space topic, and we got some NASA OSIRIS REx, or is it REX? I'm going to say REX because it's all in different abbreviations. But basically, so this OSIRIS thing, for anybody listening that doesn't know, it's NASA's first asteroid sampling spacecraft, and it's on a 7-year mission to sample from an asteroid called Bennu.
I think Bennu.
Benne. I'm going to say Bennu. But anyway, and they've had some interesting results come back from the last couple of days. So it's looking like it's a diamond-shaped pile of rubble floating through space. And if you do have Twitter, you should definitely go on Twitter and look at NASA's OSIRIS's images, because they've got some really cool, like 4K imagery rendering of it. They're using some kind of new 3D digital terrain like system, and it looks real. I know it's like fake, but it looks real. It looks awesome. And they don't know why yet, but the southern hemisphere of the asteroid seems to be really like smooth and round, and then the northern hemisphere seems to be really jagged and edged, but they don't understand why, because it isn't like having friction against anything in space. So they think that it might have come close to like a previous celestial body and like had been worn down or something that way, but they have no idea yet. But some of these photos look really cool, so anybody that's interested in that, you should definitely go and check it out. I think they've got some like infrared ones and some like normal LiDAR ones.
Yeah. So asteroids are like really interesting because they're not that well known, and there's like a lot of things that they sort of relate to. So like the search for life, there's potential that life came from these asteroids. Did they bring water to Earth? There's potential in the future of like mining them for like heavy metals and stuff. So it's really cool to see this sort of stuff take off. And I think it sort of gets pushed to the wayside now. It's sort of become a bit like common, but it's still really rare. So like since the now I said it's really common. What was the name of the one where they landed on the asteroid? I've got completely blank.
I have no idea what it's called, but I can see the video of it because it looks like it's snowing on it.
Yeah, I've got completely blank. I'm sure it'll come to me later. But like since that, this sort of stuff has sort of like not got the press coverage anymore, even though it's some of the coolest stuff that we do. So hopefully these sort of missions will find something cool and put it back in the limelight a bit, because there's a lot of sort of areas that this sort of goes into, which is interesting.
Well, it's like they always say, isn't it? Like rocks remember as well. So like there's a lot of data you can take from them, especially the very, very old ones.
Yeah. Well, yeah, potentially some of these rocks were around near the beginning, like formation of the solar system, so it could allow us to see what conditions were like back then.
And can't some of them like be outside of the solar system as well, so they can even be older?
Yeah, so some of them like actually come from outside the solar system, and there was that one recently, wasn't there? And I don't know the name of this. It's got a like a Maori name, begins with C, I think.
Oh yeah, it was like the first thing to come into
Yeah, it was
it's like
like
a
very
cigar shape.
it was very long, like long, yeah, cigar shape. That's it. Um, yeah, so these really do offer, because on sort of like our timescales, the planets are sort of fixed and nothing's really going to change with them. But like these asteroids do come about sort of more sporadically and they come and go. So they offer us a chance to see something a bit different and investigate, things that are maybe outside the norm. So.
Yeah, man, it's interesting. I saw a funny conspiracy theory on Reddit a couple of days ago, and they were talking about how octopuses came on an asteroid. They're saying how they were so different, and not the octopus itself. So whilst everybody's sitting at home right now, don't imagine like an octopus like stretched out on the front of a rock flying into our atmosphere. But they think like the microbes that went on to become an octopus, like its own form of evolution. They're saying because it's so alien, they think it could have come in from like an asteroid. And I was just like, what am I reading right now? But
Yeah,
it was funny.
Well, it is one potential solution that like the first life on Earth came from an asteroid. So
Yeah. Have you seen the film? Have you seen the film Life? Since it's October, it's Scary Month, because that's a terrible film. Not a terrible film, sorry, a terrifying film.
Terrible. I have seen it, I think, quite a while ago, but
It freaked me out.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It's like a white alien that just evolves quickly or something, I think, and then they figure out that's why like Mars got destroyed because it was from this thing. But it's cool. It's got Ryan Reynolds and Jake Gyllenhaal in it. And if you want like a scary space film, I'd probably say it's up there.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's decent.
But I think I've got one more bit of space news on my end. Yeah, so China launched a new geostationary remote sensing satellite back on Sunday, and it was under the Long March 3B Loft Gaofen 13. And they're basically saying the new satellite is possibly an improved version of the CAST development Geofen 4 that they sent up in 2015. And it's being designated into a high orbit for optical remote sensoring and land survey. And basically from that, they want to do crop yield, environmental management, weather warning, forecasts, disaster prevention, bird migration, national economic development. But they're also saying that there have been some rumors indicating that it's also going to be an optical reconnaissance satellite, but can't put it past China.
When I hear China launches satellite with sensing capability, that immediately makes me think of like spying and reconnaissance. So, I was trying to find out. I couldn't actually see like where it's being positioned, like relative to Earth, like what it's looking at, basically. I assume it's over China, but I couldn't actually find anything about that.
Yeah, the only image that I've got on this NASAspaceflight.com is just all in Chinese.
Yeah, if anyone knows where it is positioned, let us know, I guess, but because I'd be interested in that.
But yeah, that's interesting.
So the final bit of news I had was in more general science. So this is a team, I think it's a university team. I'd say it's a university team. They've basically managed to get hydrogen out of plastics by microwaving it.
Okay.
So it seems like quite a simple thing that they're doing. They basically take the waste plastic, so and I think it's quite general plastics, so plastic bags, sort of milk bottles, that sort of stuff. They mix it with a catalyst of iron oxide, which is basically rust, and aluminium oxide, which is oxidized aluminium. And they do it in a kitchen blender, and then they just microwave it with 1,000 watts. So 1,000 watts is sort of like what a kitchen microwave will do. And it basically just strips the hydrogen off the hydrocarbons.
Interesting.
So they said here they've done it with a 300-gram test bit of plastic, and were able to recover 97% of the gas within seconds. So,
Ah,
and
that's cool.
also interestingly, the solid that's left over, obviously, if you're taking hydrogen, you're going to leave this carbon, was almost exclusively carbon nanotubes. So there's a potential here of you create hydrogen for use in stuff, and you also have this sort of byproduct of carbon nanotubes. Whether it's usable stuff, I'm not sure, but
Interesting.
it's definitely, compared to the current method of getting hydrogen, which is like electrolysis of water,
Yeah.
which is really, really energy intensive. This sort of put it in a kitchen blender and microwave it for a bit seems like a good solution, maybe. But,
Yeah. That's cool.
yeah, they're planning to do this on sort of larger scales. Obviously, microwaving stuff is not easy to do on a commercial scale, but
Yeah.
potentially has legs, I think.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up this week's episode. So
Yep.
if you've been listening and you found it interesting, please let us know on social media what you think cities will look like in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll touch on autonomy and sustainable energy and AI in future episodes. Maybe even next week, one of them, because I think we're quite eager to start talking about one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you've enjoyed that and you want to let us know, hit us up on social media. It's Infinite Void Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And then our email address is theinfinitevoidpodcast@gmail.com. I'm getting smoother the more that we do this. One day I will not forget them. And then if you want to hit me up on Twitter, it's Jacob E. Carson, and Matty, you're...
I'm the Matty JMP.
And yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in the Infinite Void next week.